Hello, I'm Jak Tichenor. Welcome to this special veto session edition of Illinois Lawmakers. We're coming to you from the Speaker's Gallery here in the Illinois House of Representatives. The big news this week in Springfield, of course, is that Illinois will become the 15th state in the nation to legalize gay marriage. But we're going to have to wait a bit longer to learn what's going to happen with pension reform in the state. We're going to begin the program with a newsmaker interview with the new leader of the House Republicans in Springfield, State Representative Jim Durkin. Good to have you on the program,
Thanks,
sir.
Jack. Glad to be here. Thank you.
Especially in this new role for you.
It's exciting. Thank you.
Let's talk, first of all, about the job as leader of the House Republicans. 47 strong now. You'd like to rebuild that number and make yourselves a lot more competitive with Speaker Madigan's Democrats.
That is a priority. I think what you said, 47 strong, and I think that we need to emphasize strong because we're very united. When we went through this little internal scrum over the summer, myself and my friend Raymond Poe were both vying for the same position. We walked out of a meeting room united, and where there was a unanimous vote. Raymond Poe nominated me. History has shown in these types of events that sometimes they're not as docile and cooperative, and I think even the last time when there was a transition after Lee Daniels left, there were still some hard feelings. So, and that carried on for a number of years. We don't have that attitude right now. So, we are 47 strong, and it's 47 united also. It's
an interesting and diverse caucus in the sense of the areas you're representing, around the suburbs, of course, and out to the west, and then northwest, and then downstate largely. You have a lot of Republican House members downstate. How do you tie all of these folks together?
Well, I think it's just that I have to look at my background. I mean, I've run as a candidate statewide back in 2002, and I've traveled the state extensively, developed relationships with individuals in all corners of the state. I've run 2 presidential campaigns in Illinois, and what it's done is allowed me, and thankfully it's made me grow as an individual, just to get a better understanding of the different attitudes and mores that we have in different regions of the state. And I live in the suburbs. People think about things differently in my area than they do downstate. But my job as a leader is to respect the opinions and the attitudes of my colleagues on both sides of the aisles, from the regions and the areas on any particular issue.
You lost 7 members in the last election cycle. You had a map drawn by Democrats, and you had, of course, Barack Obama at the top of the ticket. What are you going to do to turn that tide in the next go-around?
Well, right now we are doing a very good job with our candidate recruitment, and this is the time where there's a lot of anxiety just getting petitions and getting good candidates. We're running up against a gerrymandered map. We were left behind, kind of behind the 8 ball a little bit when it comes to that. But I will tell you this, that I think that there are areas for us to expand in different regions, Southern Illinois, Central Illinois, and also in the suburbs, that we have very good candidates. I'm realistic about expectations as well, because this is a process, and and I hope that in November, a year from now, that we're going to have great results on election night. But I think the national mood is going to help us also.
Well, the national mood for the Republicans hasn't been terribly good, though, coming out of the government shutdown on Capitol Hill, and you're still somewhat out of the mainstream with at least the tide of some of the social issues in the state. Republicans, with 3 exceptions, voted against gay marriage here.
Well, you know what? I think that's an issue that you had a number of Democrats who voted against it as well. So it's a very personal, very emotional issue that every member had to make their own decision on. And I respect the opinions of people who are for and against the issue. But the biggest social issue of the day is a 9.2% unemployment rate in the state of Illinois. And to me, that's the issue that we are going to drive home about the stewardship of the state of Illinois by the Democratic Party for the past 10 years. It's put us at record deficits, but has put the state of Illinois at least 9.2, and it seems like it's not going down any lower.
What is your relationship with the other 3 leaders?
I've known them for a number of years, and I've always had a respectful, cordial relationship with my senator, Chris Radogno. We've known each other for a long time, but the speaker is somebody that I've worked with in the past, and as well with John Cullerton. And I can just tell you that, no secret, that we have been meeting over the last few weeks regarding pensions. And the fact that when we say that we've made progress, it means that we've met, we're getting along, we're discussing issues, we're finding some compromise, and I think we're moving in a good direction. But I've had a good relationship. I'm I'll work with anybody, and I want to get the issues done. I want to work with Democrats to resolve the biggest issues of the day.
We're going to turn to the issue of pensions in the next segment of Illinois Lawmakers. Best of luck to you, sir. It's good to have you in this new position.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Leader. Up next on Illinois Lawmakers, as we indicated, we will be going more in depth on the question of pension reform in the state of Illinois. Next up on Illinois Lawmakers, a conversation with two members of the Special Conference Committee that's been working on the pension problem throughout the summer and fall. We're joined by the committee's co-chair, Senator Kwame Raoul, Democrat of Chicago, and from Palatine, Deputy Senate Republican Leader Matt Murphy. Good to have you back both on the program. At the end of the session, Senator Raoul, the House and the Senate were basically deadlocked in two different approaches to pension reform. They weren't going anywhere, and they decided to dust off an old idea around here called the Conference Committee. How many of the old ideas were included, or did you just start from scratch?
Well, what we initially did, and what I suggested initially when we started the conference committee, is that since we were at a stalemate with the two bills, Senate Bill 1 and Senate Bill 2404, that perhaps we should start by embracing a different framework in order to keep the conversation going and to get to a place where we could achieve the necessary savings and guide ourselves to solvency in our pension system and to a point where we weren't crowding out expenditure on the needed services that we need to invest in the state of Illinois. And so we did that.
Senator Murphy, you took a lot of testimony. You did hear a lot of the same ideas, but there was a proposal that came out for the university presidents around the state of Illinois that started to get some momentum in the summer.
Yeah, the university president's proposal was helpful to provide sort of a third way to work around the sort of dug-in loggerheads we were at with the two particular bills. And that gave us, as Senator Raoul indicated, the framework to work from to start to negotiate something that everybody could feel comfortable with, but that still meaningfully addressed the problem.
One of the biggest areas you had to attack, and this is the area that's been out of control, if you will, for many years, is this 3% compounded cost of living adjustment that retirees all earn. It's an earned benefit. Obviously, they want to make sure that they keep that, but this is an area that you did some work on, and you took a different approach with that. What have you agreed upon to do with that area?
Well, what we did in order to have the discussion and move it forward, as Senator Murphy indicated, we embraced the framework of the university's presidents. And the main component of that framework was how they dealt with the cost of living adjustment. In their initial proposal, it was to have the cost of living adjustment be half of CPI compounded. We took that and we started toying with it a little bit, applying a cap to it, as well as a suggestion to apply a floor to it, such that if inflation went down too low, that we wouldn't be punishing the.
As I understand it, there would be at least a 1% guarantee increase, but no higher, capped at 4%. Is that correct?
That was where we were at sort of the last point where the conference committee was kicking around the proposal.
And the other side of that is there had been talks about discussions about increasing employee contributions over the course of a person's employment with the state to help bolster the numbers. But you took a different approach in actually decreasing the amount of the employees' contribution by 1%. It is sort of the operative word is consideration, to give that person something back.
So yes, so part of the debate when we were dealing with the competing proposals centered around the constitutionality of any changes that we made given the pension protection clause in our Constitution. And so the thought was to do a decrease in the employee contribution as consideration to bolster the argument of the constitutionality of whatever we came up with as a conference committee.
Were Republicans on board with that, Senator Murphy?
You know, it sounds counterintuitive when you talk to people to say we have a pension funding problem and we're going to have the employees who get the pensions pay less. So there was some initial concern with that concept, especially since the unions themselves had agreed to pay more. But the consideration argument is a legitimate argument. And, you know, if we're going to do meaningful benefit reform, if I were arguing this case to the Supreme Court, I would feel more comfortable if I had a couple of arguments where, such as this one, where if you're getting less as a pension benefit, we're charging you less. That has some symmetry to it and might help the Supreme Court find a necessary reform constitution.
It was less unconstitutional, as I heard one person put it, than perhaps the other approaches. You feel more comfortable going before the Supreme Court?
I don't want to characterize, and ultimately it's the court's decision to make, and I'm certain whatever we come up with and as a final bill will be challenged, and the courts will make a determination as to whether it passes constitutional muster. So my opinion as to whether it's more likely or less likely than other things to be constitutional, what we have is we reached a point where we had to compromise and come up with something because doing nothing was not an option.
Well, but to the governor's point of view, you weren't getting much accomplished, so he vetoed your salaries in the middle of the summer.
One of the things that I can give credit to Governor for is coming up with the idea of the conference committee. But when the conference committee started our work, that was not even a distraction to us doing our work. I don't think it helped us, but it didn't stop us from doing our work. The pleasing thing about working within the conference committee, I think it's what the legislature is supposed to be like. We were working in a bipartisan, bicameral manner to compromise towards a solution.
So you started scoring these plans, these proposals, meaning you're taking them to the actuaries with the different pension systems. And is the $138 billion savings over 30 years generally agreed upon, Senator Murphy?
No, I wouldn't say it is. I think getting to the 138 was a byproduct of the type of negotiations within the conference committee that Senator Raoul just referenced. There has been a good back and forth. And as we sit here today, I think the conference committee, I have kind of characterized it as we brought this issue inside the 10-yard line, and at this point we're going to get some help from the legislative leaders to see if we can collectively punch it into the end zone and get this resolved.
There were some additional proposals by the Republicans, I wouldn't say at the last minute, but late in the discussions that kind of threw things off track a bit.
Well, to be fair, we started out with a wide array of options, but to keep the ball moving, we focused on things that we could agree upon to submit for scoring. And that didn't take everything off the table.
Sure.
And so we got to a point, and it was personally frustrating for me at that point, but you move on in the interest of getting things done.
And so now the legislative leaders, the four tops, the caucus leaders are looking at this, and they can get some things done. When are we expecting to hear back from them, Senator Murphy?
Well, they've been meeting over the last couple of weeks, and my understanding is those have been productive meetings. There were some issues left to be resolved, and I think they're working through them. I'm hopeful they're working through them. And you made reference, Jak, to the scoring process from the actuaries. It takes what is to me a frustratingly long amount of time, I'm not an actuary, to get numbers back. We're hopeful that things they're having scored right now can be the framework for a final result. And I don't think it's over the top to suggest that something could come together before the end of the year.
And Speaker Madigan said earlier this week that it would be his hope that you might be back right after Thanksgiving. Do you think that's likely?
Well, I'm hopeful. I've been wanting to do this for months. I predicted earlier on that we'd be back here in August to get this thing done because
so did I.
But I was wrong, and then I probably made another prediction in September.
Yeah.
But I think we'll get this thing done.
Yeah, we've kind of run out of sports analogies, haven't we?
Yeah.
First and goal and whatever in the end zone.
Well, and especially for Senator Raul and I, we've been involved in this. We can see a path, and sometimes things move a little more slowly than we would like. But there hasn't really been a day since this conference committee was started that I felt like we didn't move forward, and that's still true. So that's where the optimism comes from.
Senator Raul, Senator Murphy, thanks very much for your time here on Illinois Lawmakers. We certainly appreciate this visit. Up next on the program, reaction to this week's historic vote on same-sex marriage here at the Illinois State Capitol. A bill legalizing same-sex marriage is on its way to Governor Pat Quinn's desk here at the Illinois State Capitol. Joining us now to discuss one of the hardest-fought legislative battles in recent memory are the bill's chief sponsor, Democratic State Representative Greg Harris of Chicago, and Representative Joe Sosnowski, a Rockford area Republican. Good to have you both here on the program, gentlemen. Representative Harris, this has been an issue that you've been working on ever since you set foot in this chamber. It's been a long, hard slog. How's it feel to be at this point, the battle?
It's good that this happened, but it's more important for the thousands of Illinois families who now know that their relationships are being recognized, their families are being protected, and they're being treated equally in the eyes of the law along with their neighbors.
The Senate, of course, passed this bill back in February, Valentine's Day. It made its way over to the House, but its future here was by no means certain.
Well, sure. And some of my colleagues wanted some extra time to go home and talk to their constituents over the course of the summer. And then a really amazing thing happened when the Supreme Court of the United States declared it unconstitutional for the federal government to discriminate against same-sex couples if they're legally married in their own state, in their own home states. So people realized what was at stake here. People being denied Social Security benefits, pension benefits. If a service member was overseas and was injured or killed in the line of duty, his or her partner would not even be notified. And folks just thought that was not the right way to.
How important was Pope Francis's own pronouncements on the issue of gay rights?
Well, the Speaker certainly addressed how he felt about the Pope's comments. I'm not a Roman Catholic, but I certainly appreciated what the Pope had to say about we should all be careful not to judge each other, and we should go forth with love and understanding on each other. And that's a lesson we all should follow.
Representative Sosnowski, you were a no vote. There were only 3 votes in the affirmative for this bill from the Republican caucus. 2 members who had been out in front of the bill for some time, Ed Sullivan and Ron Sandak, and of course, a little bit later, your former leader, Tom Cross, comes over and supports it. How was the bill playing itself out on the Republican side of the aisle here?
Well, I think it's important. You look at the vote. Obviously, it's a very divisive issue in the sense that there's 2 perspectives on it. There's certainly those that, such as myself, that are very much in favor of the definition of marriage being between one man and one woman. And obviously, there's the opposite viewpoint in addition. One thing important in this debate, now that we're moving forward, is to look at and make sure that we're protecting religious institutions and freedoms. And, those business owners and those churches, synagogues, and mosques that are going to have halls that are attached or affiliated with their particular religion, that they still have those protections in order to hold their fundamental religious beliefs close. And at the same time, we look forward to moving forward on this issue, and we have obviously a whole slew of other issues to work on through the state here. And it's this is one thing that I think it's been voted on. Both chambers have had their say. It goes to the governor's office now, and we'll see as things move forward here how this progresses in Illinois.
I would just add to what Representative Sosnowski said, that the bill is very careful to protect those faiths and denominations who do not wish to celebrate or consecrate marriages, and also gives blanket immunity from those particular faiths from having to use their facilities, their parish halls, their community halls, or a private institution from a Knights of Columbus having to hold a same-sex marriage if it's against their faith. That's a very important value that I think all of us share, protecting the freedom of religion.
And there's also a question from some on the Republican side of the aisle about what happens to private business owners who may have religious objections to catering or supplying flowers, what have you?
Sure. Well, and if you look at just the issue and people's perspectives on it, it's a cross-partisan aisle. There's different viewpoints on this particular issue, and that is a concern. And we're going to have to see how that legislation affects those business owners who do have religious and moral difference with the law that was passed, and will they be offered those same protections? A lot of that's going to be played out, I think, in day-to-day life. A lot of it, I think, we're going to see in the courts. And my perspective is that we need to be careful about that. We do need to preserve those religious liberties, and how that plays out in the private business sector. Can a person who makes cakes or does decorations say, I'd prefer not to be a part of this particular ceremony? And I think a lot of that is somewhat unknown by the passage of this bill, but we'll see how things roll out in the legal system.
Representative Harris, to those concerns, could this be addressed perhaps later in the form of what they call trailer legislation or cleanup bills?
I think this question has been asked and answered for decades in Illinois law, that if you open up your business to the general public, you need to serve all the general public. You cannot, under Illinois law, for many, many, many years, discriminate based on race, on religion, on sexual orientation, on gender. I think that's something we all understand, that private businesses, which are a public accommodation, are open to the public, but that faith institutions such as a church will have special protections.
Would that apply to, let's say, the issue of someone having a same-sex partner in terms of being covered by a spouse's insurance?
So partners would be eligible if they're married, and if their employer offers spousal and family coverage, they would be entitled. It would require, if they were in the hospital or in the intensive care unit, that a married partner would be allowed to come and see them. Those are just basic decency things.
What if one of those folks was employed by a religious institution? That's a question.
No, there's clear. This is where the court has been fairly clear. The U.S. Supreme Court, most recently in the case of Hannah Tabor versus the Evangelical Lutheran Church of America, said that those persons, and I'm not a legal scholar, but I'll do my best to explain, that those persons who are employed by religious institutions who profess, advance, or teach the faith certainly have a different set of protections and would not be governed, or would not be eligible for same-sex marriage benefits if their faith so chose, but that for instance, somebody who was a custodian in a hospital which might be affiliated with the church probably would have to provide those benefits.
Governor Quinn, of course, has indicated that he will sign the bill. The effective date on this is actually some months off. It's
June 1st, which is when all new laws take effect in Illinois.
Mm-hmm. There's been some discussion, at least Senator Don Harmon, a Democratic colleague of yours over in the Illinois Senate, has indicated that he might see if there's a way that you could push that date up so that it might happen after the first of the year when you don't need a supermajority to pass something here for an effective date.
Well, first of all, this is the last day of the veto session. We are not scheduled to come back here before the first of the year. We'll certainly take a look at Senator Harmon's bill, but right now what we want to focus on is getting the bill signed into law so that tens of thousands of families will finally feel equal with their neighbors.
There were many poignant moments out on the floor as this debate was joined. Probably none more so than when Representative Naomi Jacobson came in from the hospital, or the hospice where her now late son was laying, to cast a vote in favor of this bill.
I had talked to Representative Jacobson that morning, and she had talked, I guess, with her family about this issue, and they had all decided that all of her children and her husband thought that her being here to protect all families in Illinois and treat them with respect and dignity was something she ought to do. So I cannot give enough they're not words to describe her courage as a mom.
One thing's for sure, and I think you see this from all of our legislators and all my fellow colleagues, that type of dedication to the service of the state, that's an amazing thing. I don't know if I had a family member in her situation, if I'd be able to do that same thing, to take a vote that I was impassioned on, but to see that sacrifice that all of us make on a day-to-day basis, I mean, no matter how you fell on the issue, it's something to be complimented, and her dedication to her job is truly amazing.
There's no question about that, and I have to say that our thoughts and prayers are certainly with the Jacobson family at this point. Quick question about the state's Medicaid programs. You're both experts on that. You chair the Appropriations Human Services Committee in the House. You're a year into the new Medicaid reform program in the past earlier. How's it working?
I think there are some things that are working very well. It's like anything else that you change that's this big. There are some things that are working better than expected. There are some things we need to continue to work on. There are some things that might have had unintended consequences, like restrictions on adult dental or restrictions on certain behavioral health medications that we should really look at refining.
Well, one thing I think we've obviously seen, and I think this is indicative of a lot of government programs when you get to a large scale, and we've pointed this problem out for many years, and I think there's bipartisan agreement on this, is we're looking at the scrubbing of the Medicaid rolls, and to date we've looked at over 400,000 through a private enterprise that's looking at who's eligible, and over 400,000. That analysis, they've seen over 50% of them have been deemed ineligible to actually receive benefits. When we look at those types of things, it's indicative that we have a huge problem. We need to address that to make sure that we have those benefits available for those who truly need them.
Representative Cisnowski, Representative Harris, thanks very much for your time here on Illinois Lawmakers. We certainly appreciate it. That is it for this special fall veto session of Illinois Lawmakers. We will continue to monitor the situation as to where pension reform talks may go in the next few weeks after Thanksgiving, and as we roll into the holidays. We will produce another program on that, when and if we have a result on that. Otherwise, we will be back after the first of the year with the governor's State of the State speech, live coverage of that, as well as the governor's budget message to a joint session of the Illinois General Assembly. Go to our website, illinoislawmakers.org, to find out the latest on those programs and other background on the series. That is it for this special edition. Thanks so much. So long from Springfield.